Hi, I'm John Mancini with Content Results, and I've been doing a lot of work recently with Quality Associates, QAI, in the context of thinking about the implications of the M1921 set of deadlines for transfer of electronic records to NARA. And in that context, I've been talking with Scott Swiderski about some of the issues associated with any digitization project. And so I thought that it might be interesting to have a set of conversations with him and talk about the elements of successful digitization, because I was very impressed with the practical way that they approach these projects. So the first session, we'll talk about this whole question of how do you get started? How do you frame a project to begin with? The second one, we'll talk about how do you price this thing right? And that has dimensions both on the agency side as well as on the vendor side in terms of thinking, in terms of not all projects are alike. The third thing is talk about some of the unique aspects of federal contracting, because as I've learned from a lot of experience with companies and with agencies, it's a very different kettle of fish in the federal government than it is in the private sector. And then the fourth thing is talk about a typical timeline for a project. So I hope you enjoy the series, and I will post links to all of the videos that we've done in this series at the end. And thank you for your time. So in part one, we want to talk a little bit about how you get started with a digitization project. And so, Scott, I'd like to ask you, what advice do you have for agencies that are just getting started? What should they be thinking about on the front end of these projects?
Yeah, I think, John, there's quite a number of things that would come to mind in terms of recommendations around the how to get started part. But one of the key things that will become obvious to the outcome of this project is that you get all of the key stakeholders involved in the project itself. And so who could that consist of? It certainly will consist of the business owner of the material and the content and what it is that they want to do. Eventually, there'll be a technical role. So we want to make sure that we have presence from the IT folks. And then the records management folks who have likely been managing this content in its analog form for quite some time. It's always great. Eventually, we're going to have the executive discussion around costs and levels of effort and so forth. So having an executive sponsor to that stakeholder group, I think, is also really, really important player to the team. So moving on from that sort of suggestion, obviously, developing a committee that sets goals and develops a plan and looks at what the timeline and ultimately what the deliverables would need to look like. Sizing up what your contractors intended to do and getting all of this, of course, in some form of a requirements document is a little bit of a more down the road type of step. But the formalities of all those things, I think, are very, very critical. The contractor or the partner that gets selected should also have an equivalent number of key players involved in their group. And so folks like project managers and key operators and key communicators and folks helping to write and respond to what the requirements of the project look like. So as the agency lines up their group, the partner and the vendor should also be finding equivalent folks to match up with. So IT, right, wants to talk with folks that are relevant to IT. Executives like to be speaking with other executives in terms of commitments and so forth. I know the business managers also get involved in those same or similar types of discussions, but all this is very, very critical. Kind of moving on from that piece. So determining the usefulness of the process and the approach, I think what can be done. A lot of this work in many cases can be done on site at the agency. And then in other cases, the work is taken offsite. And so, what is that offsite location defined as? Is it a secure facility? Is the nature of the material secure in the sense that, it requires, that it go to a secure site? So quite a number of things to consider around the initial approach. There are always a hybrid, I should say, many different hybrid scenarios as well. Maybe a part of the collection of these legacy documents are meant to be converted on site. due to their nature and maybe high frequency of access and so forth. And then, another portion of that material might be sent back to the partner or vendor's location. So a lot of things to take into consideration, but the few things that I've mentioned are probably very key to the successful outcome of a project.
It's really interesting. It's, even though we're talking specifically about M1921 oriented kinds of projects, it's all very consistent with all the years that I've had dealing with end users trying to set up projects, is that they tend to not spend enough time on the front end of these projects. And, and when they don't spend enough time on the front end of these projects, getting the foundation laid properly, then they pay for it later on because they're somewhat building on a house of sand, and then everything kind of goes topsy-turvy after that. So even though it seems sometimes like we're spending an inordinate amount of time on the front end, it pays dividends, I think, on the back end.
Well, for sure. I think the worst of the opportunities that we get invited into are the ones that we're cleaning up from a process that wasn't carefully designed and carefully managed. And so we don't want to have to do the work twice. And in order to avoid that scenario, we've got to follow a very formal process.
So that's a good bridge to just the last thing I wanted to talk about in this segment, are mistakes. We've talked about all the good things people should do. What are some of the biggest mistakes people make? How do they screw these things up?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mentioned just a few of the areas that seem to come up with a lot of the work that we do. So number one, the defining of who's going to do what, right, in the project. It most often, the agency plays a key role, and the vendor and the partner, obviously play a key role in getting this deliverable to exist. I think the communication plan and the ultimate written plan is key to making sure that expectations are aligned for both the agency and the vendor. The other thing is, without the expertise from the vendor side, there's always the chance that something may be vastly underestimated. And because this is really it's a service offering, obviously, but it's a process, right? And so clearly things like document preparation to prepare the material for their scan ready purpose take place prior to the actual digitization. And so when a step within a process is largely underestimated, the entire outcome of the project is at risk. And so when we talk about risks to the project, we're talking about potentially the quality of the deliverables, the vendor or the partner, being capable of keeping their relationship, intact from a time frame perspective and also a cost perspective.